I'm joined by my colleague Neha Khanna, Deputy Editor, News9 Live. Neha, welcome to the News9 Plus show.
Thank you so much, Sandeep. Great to be here with you.
Neha, just make sense of what's going on. Cold War 2.0, US aircraft carriers in the Mediterranean, Russia sending in carrier killer missile armed fighter jets into the Mediterranean. Is a replay of the Cold War going on here?
You know, it's beginning to look like that increasingly. And you know, a lot of people are saying, Sandeep, that what the Russia-Ukraine war couldn't do, the Israel-Hamas conflict is managing to achieve. By that, I think what people are essentially saying is that there is an unmistakable widening of this conflict.
Right.
If anybody thought that this was going to be confined to Israel just pounding Gaza and going after Hamas, it increasingly looks like it's not going to remain confined to that.
Right.
Now, let's look at, you know, some facts that have come to the fore in just the last few days. You've had Israeli strikes on Hezbollah targets in Lebanon.
Right.
You've had Israelis targeting certain sites in Syria. There's been an exchange of gunfire there. Iran is repeatedly issuing threats to Israel, saying, remember, our hands are on the trigger.
Right.
You know, you have Turkey, which is very upset with Israel. They've very publicly taken that stand. You have Russia and China, and you were just referring to Putin. You have Russia and China jumping in.
Yeah.
Clearly siding with the Palestinians.
Right.
And not just blaming Israel, but pointing a finger at the United States for what's happened and accusing it of having completely failed as far as this Middle East policy is
you know,
concerned.
Neha, the interesting thing is that the
Yes.
carrier strike groups, two of them incidentally,
Yes.
and they're the most powerful naval combat power formations in the world. There are two of them being sent in to, warn the other actors like Iran and Hezbollah to stay away. But I think President Putin seems to have pulled another one, a number on the Americans by sending in the aircraft. So how does this kind of change things in the next couple of days?
It does look like, Putin is sending out a clear message to the United States. In fact, it's very interesting. Sandeep, I just interviewed former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert, and when I asked him about whether this conflict was widening, whether Syria and Lebanon and other countries could get sucked into it, Iran and the United States, because as you mentioned, the United States has sent its aircraft carrier. Biden was in Tel Aviv yesterday expressing unstinting support for Israel. He said something interesting. He said, I somehow don't see the conflict widening because all these countries would do well to remember that they don't want a war with the United States.
Yes.
Having said that, that may be the belief of the former Prime Minister of Israel, but the reality on the ground seems to be very different, as you just suggested, Sandeep.
In fact, Neha, let's just listen to what former Prime Minister Ehud Olmert told you. Let's listen in.
So do you think Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is losing the perception war and the political battle at home? Because many have called for his resignation for his failure to prevent the Hamas attacks, sir. And I'm talking about Israeli people who are angry with Prime Minister Netanyahu. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, you know that I happen not to like Netanyahu very much. I don't trust him. I don't think that he's the right person for the job. I think he has failed completely, and it's been a long time. He is the inspirator of this policy to ignore the Palestinian Authority and to build up some kind of a tacit cooperation with Hamas. He made the deal that released more than 1,000 murderers of Hamas in the exchange of one Israeli soldier, and all those murderers that he released from jail are now the leaders of Hamas and are responsible for these vicious attack against the state of Israel. So from the point of view of the Israelis, he failed in providing security for the people of Israel. He lost the trust of the people of Israel. He is not reliable in the eyes of the majority in our country, and his days are gone. It's a matter of a short time. We will have another leadership, and the mood of the state of Israel will be a lot more positive, a lot more moderate, and a lot more forthcoming in the desire to achieve the reconciliation and peace between us and the Palestinian Authority. after the Hamas will be removed from Gaza.
So, a very pragmatic man, and it's very rare for a politician to, criticize a serving Prime Minister of Israel as former Prime Minister Olmert seems to have done. So, clearly, Bibi Netanyahu isn't very popular back home.
He isn't, Sandeep. In fact, there have been a series of news reports in recent days suggesting that his popularity ratings or approval ratings are at an all-time low.
Right.
We know that he runs a minority government,
Yes.
which has been on a shaky wicket for a very long time. The political turmoil at home hasn't helped.
Right.
Many also believe that he took his eye off the ball
Yes.
because he was too busy quelling those protests at home against the judicial overhaul. And as a result of that, today you have a situation where there are Israelis questioning the failure of the Netanyahu government
Yes.
to prevent these horrific Hamas terror attacks, the worst in Israeli history. And, like you said, the former Prime Minister there, who in fact does belong to the Likud party, saying in very, very strong terms, I do not like Netanyahu, I do not trust this man.
Right.
He has completely messed up, he has failed as a Prime Minister, he failed to prevent these attacks, and he went on to say that he's not going to last very long. He runs a government of far-right elements,
Right.
they're not going to be there for very long, and soon we're going to have a far more moderate government in place. And he also actually expressed the optimism, interestingly, Sandeep, that once there is a more moderate government in Tel Aviv, and once Israel has quote-unquote wiped out Hamas, that
Yes.
there is actually going to be a real chance for peace
Right.
between the Palestinians and the Israelis. That's what he told me.
And he told you that they want to rid the Palestinians of Hamas.
Exactly. He
Right.
said it's not just Israel that needs to be set free from Hamas.
Right.
Palestinians themselves need to be set free from, as he put it, these monsters, because they kill their own people.
Right.
They're absolutely heartless. We know that they use Palestinians as human shields. So he said the only way, I asked him actually very specifically, Sandeep, what is Israel's end game? Because that's the question that many are asking.
Yeah.
You're pounding Gaza to rubble.
Yeah.
You're killing hundreds and hundreds of Palestinians every day. There is now growing anger, by the way, around the world
Yes.
over the killings of, and whether it's a disproportionate response by Israel, right? Initially, there was a lot of sympathy for Israel. Some believe that narrative may be shifting.
Right.
But then, what the former Prime Minister told me is that there is hope for peace. Our end game is to get rid of Hamas and to bring the peace process with the Palestinians back on track. But that can only happen when you have a more reasonable man like Mahmoud Abbas back in charge. He, in fact, was all praise for Mahmoud Abbas while he was critical of his own Prime Minister.
It's interesting when, they were like, they couldn't stand the sight of each other when the Palestinians were around. The PLO was around and Mahmoud Abbas. And now the same Mahmoud Abbas looks so much more, moderate and acceptable when you're faced with someone like Hamas. But my question is, Neha, if you wipe out Hamas, which they hell-bent on doing, Israel, what comes after that? Would there be like a Hamas 2.0, like exactly like when you got rid of Al-Qaeda, ISIS sprang up.
Exactly.
Is there a possibility that after Hamas you could be looking at a far worse kind of Hamas 2.0 or a PLO 3.0 or what have you?
That can never be ruled out. If you look at, the history of these terror organizations that you just mentioned, the Israelis now go on saying that Hamas are worse than ISIS and worse than Al-Qaeda. But look how they sprang up, right? And another very interesting point that he made in this context, I asked him, Sandeep, Ehud Olmert, I said, you're pounding Gaza every day and a lot of innocent civilians are losing their lives. But isn't it true that a lot of the Hamas leadership and the masterminds of the terror attacks on Israel are sitting pretty far away in the luxury and safety of Qatar?
They're so far away from
and
the
he had
conflict.
an interesting answer to that. He says, if history tells you anything, it is this. Israel knows how to get its enemies regardless of where they are. And I think he dropped a huge hint there, if you ask me, Sandeep.
Right.
He obviously didn't want to go into any of those operational details, but he says, I can assure you, regardless of whether they're in Gaza or elsewhere, because my question pointedly was about Qatar. He said, history will tell you we know how to get our enemies. But again, question does remain, can there be any path forward for peace? He says once we've got rid of Hamas, there will be peace talks and negotiations.
Right.
But is it going to be as simple as he makes it sound?
It doesn't seem like, and from what you mentioned, Neha, it's very clearly he's pointing at a Munich, post-Munich kind of scenario where they went around, assassinating all the masterminds, all the PLO people who planned that horrific massacre. And in this case, for instance, you're looking at one of the worst terror attacks probably in the 21st century.
Yes.
The barbarity of the attacks, targeting, men, women, children, especially the aged, and that horrifying as it is. I thought that the Hamas rockets were one up, where you're actually using a military artillery weapon against civilian populations. I thought that was bad enough, but here they kind of descended to this level of barbarity that was shocking. But on that note, I want to bring in this explainer that we did on the Hamas rockets and why it's so important to Hamas's arsenal, why Hezbollah and Hamas continue to stock up on these low-cost steel tube rockets. Let's watch this. Rockets are unguided military projectiles. They're cheap, easy to build, and fired en masse, they can deliver both physical and psychological effects. The Soviet Union used Katyusha rockets with devastating effect against Nazi Germany during the Second World War. Today, every military uses rockets. Now, in the last few decades, terror groups like Hezbollah and Hamas have pioneered the use of military-style rockets to attack Israeli civilians. Hezbollah, based in the West Bank, has over 100,000 rockets and even guided missiles. Hamas has tens of thousands of such rockets in Gaza, beginning with variants of the Qassam rocket. The Qassam rocket has a range of between 5 and 17 kilometers. Hamas has other sophisticated rockets like the Grad and the M75 and the M302, which have ranges of between 40 and 160 kilometers. But these bigger rockets are complicated to build and hence they're fewer in number. Hamas's mainstay is the Qassam rocket. It's a simple steel tube rocket. It has a 9 kg warhead. It's around 6 feet tall. It has variants going up to 8 feet with a 10 kg warhead. Now these rocket components are cheap, they're easily available. In fact, in many cases, Hamas has even converted metal water pipes into Qassam rockets. The rocket fuel is made from sugar and potassium nitrate. The warhead is made of TNT and ammonium nitrate with steel shrapnel embedded to cause the maximum damage. Now, the rockets can be launched from anywhere along the border with Israel into populated areas. And seen from a terror group's perspective, it's far easier to launch dozens of rockets to kill and maim civilians than it is to mount complicated terror strikes. Now, Iran is believed to have helped Hamas build its own rockets locally. Hamas has rocket engineers who build these projectiles in secret underground factories in Gaza's tunnels. Now, Israel has developed the sophisticated Iron Dome missile defense system to intercept rockets fired by Hamas and Hezbollah. But each Iron Dome interceptor missile costs between $50,000 and $100,000 to make. But each Qassam rocket, on the other hand, costs just $300 and $800. It's far cheaper than Israel's interceptor rockets. So the short-range rocket, for these reasons of cost and simplicity, will continue to be the terror group's weapon of choice in the Middle East. Yeah, so that clearly tells you that cost differential between a Qassam rocket and one of the Iron Dome interceptors. I mean, there's like $800 and $50,000. That clearly tells you why Hamas would keep stockpiling those. But Neha, coming back to President Putin and President Biden, just look at what he just said. It's very rare that a Russian leader would mention it in such great detail. The MiG-31, our MiG-31 planes are equipped with Kinzhal missiles, which have a speed of Mach 9 and a range of 1,000 kilometers. I mean, this is like very old school Cold War posturing, the kind that President Putin is a Cold Warrior, right? He was in the KGB during the Cold War.
Yeah.
So he's kind of revisiting the Cold War, it seems like.
In fact, I would like to ask you this because, you are an old hand, Sandeep, when it comes to defense journalism. You're one of the finest we have in the country. You've covered these stories very closely. Why do you think that Putin is looking to escalate matters the way that he is? Because he already has his back to the wall.
Right.
He's fighting this war against Ukraine.
Yeah.
He's polarized the world with that war already. He has NATO practically knocking on his door.
Yes.
And, and then of course not to mention the global sanctions that Russia faces. Why do you think, yes, you can say that he has China in his corner and there is that very interesting nexus that seems to be emerging, Russia and China and some would say Iran and North Korea.
Yeah.
But why, in your assessment, is Putin looking to escalate this with the United States?
The short answer is that the days of the US being the sole superpower of the world are over. That's what Putin and Xi Jinping are telling the world. That look, the United States as the global supercop, as the sole superpower, those days are gone. They're never coming back. Now you're looking at a multipolar world order where you will have countries like Russia, China, you will have swing states like India that could tilt the balance whichever side they choose to go to. But the essential part is that after 3 decades of the post-Cold War era, when the United States held supreme, they could do whatever they want. They could go and bomb Iraq, they could go and attack Afghanistan, they could go into North Africa, but those days are over. So nothing is going to happen now without there being some kind of a response from China, Russia. And you look at the way these leaders are stacking up. You have Xi Jinping, President Putin, Iran, and North Korea. They're all the erstwhile axis of evil that they once said. Those 3 countries, Iran, Iraq, and North Korea. Iraq is out of the equation now. Now you have United States, China, Iran, and North Korea. This is the new power axis. They have a lot of contradictions. I mean, I don't think China and Russia are going to be friends forever. This is a relationship of convenience.
But anti-Americanism, I think, is glue enough to keep them together for now.
Yes, because China would very much like to be the number one, the numero uno superpower of the world. And China, let's not forget, he's looking at Taiwan. And he would very much want a conflict in the Middle East right now, so that the Americans are focused on solving that thing, putting out the fire there, while Xi Jinping makes a play for Taiwan. That could very well be the case. How many conflicts can the United States oversee? In fact, this question was asked to President Biden before he landed in Israel. And he said, we're the United States, we can fight 2 wars, 2 conflicts is nothing. We're the most powerful nation in the history of the world. That's the case. The United States is the most powerful nation in the history of the world. I don't think there's ever been a power as preeminent and as supreme as them. But now that power is being challenged by a manufacturing powerhouse like China and a commodity superpower like Russia. Russia's just showed President Putin was looking at what was unfolding in Afghanistan very clearly. And he's a very, very astute, long game player. And he saw the American withdrawal as a sign of weakness, and which is why he decided to move into Ukraine. He might have miscalculated. There must have been a massive intelligence failure surely it was a massive intelligence failure when they went into Ukraine, thinking that the
Remember, he had said
collapse.
It would be over in 2 weeks, the war?
The Russian soldiers had come in with their ceremonial uniforms packed. They thought there was going to be a parade, right? Catastrophic intelligence failure, number 1. The second biggest intelligence failure was the failure of the West, particularly NATO, to anticipate Russia playing a war of attrition, fighting a war of attrition. 600 days, they're still at it. They're just fighting on and on, firing artillery shells that people had no idea that the Russian military-industrial complex was so powerful that it could produce so many artillery shells and missiles. And while this whole thing is on, he's casually deploying fighter aircraft and bombers and, Kinzhal missiles.
And this days after withdrawing from the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty.
That's correct. And he's been signaling. And if you look at those, videos of those guys accompanying him with a nuclear, suitcase behind him in tow, just to signal that, listen, deterrence is still there. It's very much part of the equation. So, I mean, that's essentially what we're looking at. And every such regional scenario, whether it's Ukraine and Russia, whether it's Israel and Hamas is going to be a flashpoint in this larger great game between these countries, where they're all jostling to take the power of the United States and basically tell the US that, listen, your numero uno power days as a
are long over.
Chinese coming in and mediating between Saudi Arabia and Iran, I think that was the case in point.
Absolutely.
That must have astonished the United States when it happened, which
why, for its part, was busy trying to normalize ties between Saudi Arabia and Israel.
That's correct.
They were very close to signing a pact, and that is now completely derailed.
It's derailed.
Thanks to these what's happening now.
Now, so what you're looking at is that it's historic because you have the Saudis, you have the Prince MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, speaking to the Iranian leadership. He had a long conversation with them after the attack on the 7th of October. But he's not talking to the Israelis, which would have been the final puzzle in that jigsaw. If the Saudis had recognized Israel, that would have been the diplomatic coup of our lifetimes.
So let me ask you this question then, because that is something that a lot of people are talking about. That, the Israelis keep saying that Iran is the quote-unquote head of the snake.
Right.
They are the ones who've orchestrated these attacks by Hamas. Hamas couldn't have done this on its own. Now, there is plenty of reason to believe, Sandeep, that they were never going to let normalization of ties happen between Saudi Arabia and Israel, and that it works to their advantage if this entire process gets derailed, which it now has.
Absolutely, and they stand to lose the most. Iran stands to lose the most if Saudi Arabia gets into the same camp as Israel, which is the American-sponsored peace process, right?
Exactly.
This was their last bet for breaking that alliance, and we're very sure, given what's happened on 7th of October and this horror that's been unfolding in Gaza, the relentless bombing campaign, there's no way a Saudi head of state or a crown prince can be seen talking peace with Israel for the next couple of years.
Exactly.
It's the entire region has gone into
Iran wanted to sabotage this, they've done it very successfully. If at all.
Yes, the Islamic world has been unified now. It's all on the same page when it comes to condemning Israel. And it's really sad because what happened on October the 7th, there can be no defense for that.
Yes.
In fact, I was just reading this very interesting statement by one of the Middle Eastern scholars. I want to quote what history professor Yuan Cole at the University of Michigan wrote in his essay in the Telegraph. Interesting. He says, 4 ways that the Hamas raid violated Islamic law. Hamas murdered innocents, including women and children. It destroyed a town. It did not give fair warning. And it took civilians as hostages. And Cole quotes Prophet Muhammad saying that do not kill weak, old men, small children or women. And they've done exactly this. They violated all the tenets, what the Prophet says. But, coming back to this horror of the 7th of October, Neha, I mean, how did you react to this thing of, was this part of the plan to inflict so much of horror there that there would be a retaliation from the Israeli side, and as we just described, this whole geopolitical thing would start, this entire row of dominoes would start, collapsing, as they seem to have done in the last couple of days.
They have, haven't they? I think it can be safely said that this has caused a geopolitical earthquake.
Right.
These attacks, let's face it, Sandeep, are not just the worst in Israel's history, and they keep saying that this is the worst assault on Jews since the Holocaust. I think it'll be safe to say that this is one of the worst terror attacks anywhere in the world ever.
Right.
It is not without reason that the Israelis are likening Hamas to ISIS and Al-Qaeda and saying that they are even worse. Yes, we've seen Al-Qaeda and ISIS behead people and film it in the past. But I have to say there are no words, Sandeep, to describe the butchery, the savagery and the barbarism that was displayed by those Hamas terrorists when they went about slaughtering innocent Israelis on the 7th of October. It's not just men they went after, the torture they inflicted on women, the brutal rapes, parading them. What explains beheading of babies? There was this debate for days whether this actually happened. Fact of the matter is, it did happen. And, there is absolutely, it's not something that the human mind can even begin to comprehend or fathom. The kind of savagery that they displayed, burning people alive. Those are videos that have been going viral on the social media. And Sandeep, even though you and I, having been journalists for so long, are sort of inured unfortunately, to
violence.
bloodshed and
Yes.
violence. But I must confess, I had to look away. Every time a video like that played out before my eyes, I had to look away. So it is unprecedented at so many levels.
Right.
And I think it would be naive to assume that Hamas didn't know what it was getting itself into, that it did not know that it would invite the kind of reaction that it has from Israel.
Right.
But there are also questions being asked about what after the aerial strikes. Most believe it's a foregone conclusion that there's going to be a ground assault next, and there are a lot of questions there lingering over that particular issue, Sandeep. What happens if Israel does, in fact, launch an unprecedented ground offensive, something they've never done before? Are they really ready for it? What's causing the delay? There are some who believe that this maze of tunnels that you have under Gaza, known as the Gaza Metro, the booby traps, the fear of hostages being held there, that is not going to be an easy space for the Israelis to negotiate. And then parallels are being drawn with the Vietnamese war, with I believe Americans losing at least 12,000 of their soldiers.
Only in the tunnels, in the
Thanks
tunnel
to
warfare.
the tunnels.
Yes,
Thanks to the tunnels. So this is not going to be easy for either side.
It's not, but and Neha, do you actually believe that there is a window of so-called opportunity that's closing on Israel as the longer the airstrikes play out, and the longer opinion kind of builds up against this horrific carnage of civilians, thousands being killed. The hospital attack in Gaza was particularly horrific. I mean, irrespective of which side carried it out, but it was, you don't attack hospitals. And this is clearly something that we're going to see a lot of, given literally the quantum of ordnance that's being dropped in a very limited, urban space. Do you think that sympathy, public sympathy that was there with Israel on the 7th of October, everyone stood up for Israel when those attacks unfolded? Do you think that sympathy is being eroded as these airstrikes play out?
I strongly believe it is, Sandeep. Can I very quickly tell you about some of the interviews that I've done? I have interviewed victims on both sides, and we know there are victims on both sides.
Right.
And it's hard to imagine there can be any winners in a war like this.
Right.
I have spoken to families of hostages. I have spoken to people who've lost their loved ones in the Hamas attacks.
Right.
And like I said, the butchery and the savagery that they described to me was bone-chilling, to say the least.
Right.
It breaks your heart. Just today there was news, Sandeep, that a young girl called Noya, 13-year-old, who had autism, her body, she had been taken hostage by Hamas, and her body has been found. Her 80-year-old grandmother was taken hostage. Her dead body has been found. 5 members of this family were taken hostage. I interviewed Noya's mother just a few days ago. She could not fight back her tears while talking about her daughter and her mother, and she kept talking to us with folded hands, saying, I am pleading with the whole world, I'm begging the world, I'm begging Hamas, please bring back our people. And now it's been confirmed that they're dead. That is heartbreaking, absolutely. But what's also happening on the other side of the border is equally heart-wrenching. I have spoken to Palestinians in the West Bank, for example, Sandeep, who've told me that they have family who are trapped in Gaza. They've not been able to establish communication with them for days, that they're constantly moving around, that even talk of southern Gaza being safer than northern Gaza is an absolute myth. People have lost their lives there too. Any building can be bombed any minute. And the number of innocent Palestinians who are dying every day in Israeli air attacks, many are now describing it as a disproportionate response by Israel. Yes, the Hamas attacks were unprecedented, but so are the aerial strikes that are being carried out by Israel. And I, for one, as a journalist and as an observer, do believe, what you just said, Sandeep, that the narrative may be shifting, and it may be shifting rapidly. I put this question to Ehud Olmert, the former Israeli Prime Minister, as well, that do you not believe that you're fast losing the world's support and sympathy? Because there's growing anger over the number of Palestinians who are being killed. You referred to the hospital attack. Now, of course, there have been claims and counterclaims. Israel blames Islamic Jihad and Hamas. They blame Israel. But at the end of the day, if schools, hospitals, homes are going to be bombed and reduced to rubble, and innocent Palestinians who we know have nothing to do with Hamas are going to be killed and butchered, then obviously people are going to stand up and say that isn't this state-sponsored terrorism? At least I know that's what the Palestinians and their supporters are asking. And how much longer will the international community, which is currently standing in Israel's corner, ranging from America or Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister of the UK, who happens to be in Israel today, how much longer can they afford to be seen standing in the corner of Israel, which very soon may start being perceived as the oppressor? The tables may turn very soon.
We'll come back to that story, Neha, very quickly. But first, I want to play out that interview that you've done with some of the families of the Israeli hostages. Let's listen in.
Joining me now is a special guest from Israel. We are joined by Ambassador Maya Kadosh, senior Israeli diplomat, currently serving as national coordinator for COP28 in the Israeli Foreign Ministry. She, in fact, has served as Deputy Chief of Mission at the Israeli Embassy here in India. Ma'am, first and foremost, my heartfelt condolences over the unimaginable loss of lives that's happened in Israel. You know, all of us, including here in India, have been watching with horror what's unfolded in your country. I know many in Israel have said this is our 9/11. How would you describe, ma'am, the events of the last 3 days?
First of all, thank you for your words of condolences. All the support we can get now is highly appreciated, and really thank you. I would describe it, I think, for the Indian audience as 26 November. It was a surprise. We never thought that such magnitude of attack can happen to our civilians. We've been through a few rounds of rockets and missiles from Gaza. We know that we are neighbors for a terror organization, but we've never experienced something like we are experiencing now. The news are horrible, the numbers are horrible. The fact that children, elderly, handicapped people are involved is heartbreaking. The stories that you hear about the cruelty are unimaginable. And also, at the same time, the heroes that were there, that fought for their life of their families, are inspiring.
I can imagine. It's been described as a massacre on an unprecedented scale, and that's exactly what it has been. The fact that Hamas says that more than 100 Israelis are even being held hostage in Gaza as we speak, that must be a huge concern and source of fear, not just for the families, but for all of Israel. How hopeful are you, ma'am, that those people can be brought back home safely?
I'm very hopeful. I'm sure that all of them will be brought back home safely. We put Hamas in charge of their life. I don't know what kind of cruel animal people will take into hostage babies without their parents and elderly people and women. But I know that we won't rest until the last of them will be home.
Well, most certainly, that is exactly what Prime Minister Netanyahu has also said. But ma'am, at a point like this, I know this is an impossibly difficult time for Israel. But, questions are being asked. And one of the biggest questions that's being asked is just how could an intelligence failure on such an unimaginably massive scale take place, given how strong Israel's security and intelligence apparatus are widely believed to be, with both Shin Bet and Mossad. Was there absolutely no credible intelligence available that something as huge as this was being plotted right in Israel's backyard?
Obviously, as far as we know, we didn't have any intel on that. I think many people ask themselves a lot of questions. There will be time to discuss all these issues, and as we speak now, already process of understanding what happened and investigating and learning from these mistakes is happening as we speak now. But it's way too early to say anything of real about it.
That's really poignant, and it's horrific. I mean, There's that saying that every bullet fired in war finds its target, a mother's heart, and that's exactly what we are seeing on both sides. There's violence, senseless violence on both sides. And in fact, one of my colleagues just did this very interesting story on the kibbutzim that Hamas had struck. It's the Israeli way of life, the kibbutzes and kibbutzim, and why they particularly chose those settlements to attack, where they not only struck at civilians, but they also struck at an Israeli way of life. Let's watch that short documentary.
Early Saturday, on October the 6th, Hamas terrorists struck Israel. They were well armed and well trained. Kibbutz, a type of farming communes dotting the areas next to the border, took the worst hit. And Kfar Aza was one of the areas that saw the most gruesome attack that Israel has suffered.
Kfar Aza is a village close to the Gaza border. Residents of this kibbutz were held captive for 48 hours by Hamas militants. When the Israel army was finally able to secure the place, they found men, women and children, many slaughtered in their beds, blood everywhere, houses ransacked and burnt. The militants had gone door to door executing victims. The scale of devastation was unprecedented.
It's not a battlefield. You see the babies, the mother, the fathers in their bedrooms, in their protection rooms, and how the terrorists kill them. It's not a war. It's not a battlefield. It's a massacre. It's a terror activity. So you can look it on yourself. It's something that I never saw in my life.
The Israel Defense Forces went house to house, collecting the dead in body bags and loading them onto a truck.
All right, there is the security team over here, combat soldiers, opening the houses, just looking for another terrorist, maybe, if there is. After that, I'm a search and rescue unit. We're going to salvage what's left, unfortunately.
This story was repeated in other similar communes. They bore the brunt of the assault.
Every kibbutz had a defensive organization in the kibbutz. Over the years, and with this agitation going on in Israel, coupled with that week of celebrations of that period, that put their guard down. And they highly depended on the artificial intelligence, their technology. The Hamas, you must give them credit, they use the sub-conventional technique to come under the radar and strike. So they achieve surprise. Do not only rely on technology. You got to have your eyes and ears on the ground, which should be standby 24/7 and be alert.
About 125,000 people live across approximately 250 of these kibbutzes in Israel. For many, these farming communities were symbols of community living, idyllic lives and safety. Now that lies shattered. According to some reports, IDF soldiers spent about 48 hours fighting waves and waves of terrorists on the roads and in the neighboring communities before they could reach some of these places.
I remember going through 9/11 and waking up the next day, the next week, in a daze, and everything had changed. And it's the same thing again, but worse, because we're such a small country, and proportionally this would be 25,000 people dying in America.
The depth of the horror unleashed by Hamas on Israeli communities near the border with the Gaza Strip on Saturday was still emerging, and it is this unprecedented brutality that is driving Israel's response against Hamas this time.
I'd like to introduce my senior colleague Geeta Datta, deputy editor, who put that fascinating documentary on the kibbutzim together. Geeta, why did Hamas strike at the kibbutzim?
So these kibbutz were the Israeli, way of life. When they came from Belarus, we were speaking to our guest yesterday. He was telling us a very interesting story that when they came here, there were no cities in Israel, right? So they all came and they had these farming communities, and they set these up, and they were enclosed communities where everybody was living. It was love and peace, and all the artists and painters and intellectuals, everybody who came, they lived in this commune where nobody was getting salary. They were all pooling in their money. They were sharing the money, but he said they came with soft hands, but they were basically farming communities, right? So they came with the idea of telling them to till the land, and they were tilling the land, and they were so busy in earlier sort of establishing these kibbutzim that they were not allowed to have children. So men and women both were required to till the land, so they weren't allowed to have the children there. And the first child to be born in the first kibbutz was Moshe Dayan.
Moshe Dayan,
he was the first guy ever to be born in first person of Israel to be born there. So and the way they were sort of designed were that the kids were placed in the center, because even the kids after a certain age were eventually, when so that they said, okay, fine, we've had a child, so why not others? The children were kept right in the center, and then the houses were around it. So that's how it was planned. And then over the years they said, no, let the child be with the family. So that's how sort of these kibbutz were, and they've now sort of from 1910 when they first started to now they've become a series of kibbutz have come together and formed a community. So they're all very mechanical. They've got all these all the possible latest machineries, and they've got industries there. And all these people,
they contribute to the economy.
They contribute to the economy. They export things abroad, but it's like I make something, you make something, she makes something. So it's all of them together. So it's actually the culture and heart of the Israel society and history and everything. And I think Hamas knew about it. And and also the kibbutz that were attacked were on the border. So they were right on the border. So when they cut the fence, they were the first ones there. And I just want to make one thing very clear, Sandeep. Whatever happens from the first time that they entered kibbutz, because they had a security fence from which they came in, and like my guest was saying yesterday, he said, I hate to use the word fortunate, but the people who were killed, the mother and child, and they were forensic people I've been reading about who've been crying because they were, some of the people were burnt together, and there was one particular body when they realized that they were actually not one, two, which is that the parents hugged their child when they were being burnt alive. Let's not forget, I've been speaking to the NSA I spoke to the ambassador. Let's not forget the anger of Israel and the disproportionate reaction that's coming from them. Other than the rave party, it's because when they went into kibbutz 48 hours later, what they have seen over there. So kibbutz attack is the thing that one should never forget, because apart from the brutality and horror that Neha has been talking about, it's here that you got to see the attacks of the toddlers our reporters there. I spoke to him, and he told me that he is an eyewitness, and he's seen the babies beheaded. He's seen the weapon that was used lying on the floor, bloodied. And so and all of these, the general who's gone there when he eventually reached Kfar Aza, one of the kibbutz, or Be'eri, where the beheading of the kids were, he's called it a massacre. And he said, I've seen the worst possible things during war. I've never seen anything like this. So kibbutz is your reason. When people started saying that, this horror couldn't have happened, didn't happen, whatever, the Israeli guys, I've seen it in Wolf Blitzer's show on CNN, they were sitting with photographs, and they said, look, I have to show it to you, because people started saying, you're lying.
Did it really happen?
Did it really happen?
It did.
So our reporter told us that, but let's not forget that the disproportionate response of the Israeli army, who are waiting with their tanks revving up, is because each one of them, because they're going to go in from the same kibbutz areas. Remember, they're getting into Gaza from that area, which is why they were the closest to Gaza, which is why these kibbutz came in.
Neha, I want to bring in Neha. Neha, one of the families of the hostages that you interviewed. She had been lifted from one of the kibbutzes you mentioned.
That's right. You know, I spoke to Galit Dan, and like I said, the unfortunate news that has come in is that her 13-year-old child, Noya, who had autism, has been found dead. 5 members of the family were taken away from this kibbutz.
Horrible. Right.
And, you know, like I told you, the mother just kept crying on that show. And, you know, her tears are haunting me today, Sandeep, because her mother has been found dead, her daughter has been found dead. And again, the savagery that Geeta just referred to, I think is something that just boggles the mind. I also interviewed, Sandeep, for the star,
yes,
Rona Lee Shimon. She sounded very, very angry and emotional, and she spoke to me about this. She said, I cannot believe that after what we've gone through, people are saying that Israel is lying, that this is a fake narrative. She says, you think we don't have evidence? We have wondered whether to share those horrific videos that we have of beheaded babies with the world as evidence. But those pictures and videos are so damaging for the human soul.
Yes.
We are wondering, should we really be putting it out there? So the barbarism is unimaginable, and it completely boggles the mind, Sandeep.
I want to actually play that interview of yours with the family of the hostages. Let's listen in.
Hadas, please tell us and our viewers what happened that day, and how many members of your family, who all have been kidnapped, and what do we know about them and their condition?
Okay. We live in a peaceful, quiet village just near Gaza. In 6:30 in the morning, they will start bombing us. Bombs. It was really massive bombs. And then we heard terrorists coming. We heard Arab language. Suddenly we understand the terrorists came inside our village, our kibbutz. In half an hour after, we understand they go house by house and kill and murder and butchered and slaughtered. We had a massacre, pogrom. We just here to pray and to begging for the whole world. Help. Anyone who can help in any way, talk to the government, talk to God, talk to anyone you can to release this innocent citizen. We must act. We must release them. We must bring them to our hands. I talk like from my heart as a mom. We are in. I want you and the whole world to go inside and just imagine for a minute your child like hopeless, like been taken like this in a cruel hands, and we don't have any information. We have nobody to talk. We've been a peaceful and a peace mind village. We helped Gaza people. We took them to hospital. We took them. We gave them work. We've been. Our faith was to peace. I still believe in peace.
So one can only imagine what the families must be going through right now, Neha. And it's absolutely it's so pointless at one level. This geopolitical games that are being played on the bodies of civilians on both sides. Yeah. It's not just the Israeli side. The horror that's unfolding in Gaza right now. I mean, do you think it's the worst since the Syrian civil war, Neha? It's
absolutely the worst. If Israel has suffered the worst, well, it's the same for Gaza and the Palestinians there. It's been described for the longest time as an open-air prison, as we know. But what's happening right now is that hospitals are turning into mass morgues and cemeteries. Yeah. And these are not even my words, Sandeep. These are words of a young Palestinian woman who I spoke to earlier, who said that her entire family is trapped there. I spoke to another Palestinian woman who is a humanitarian aid worker, and she said that we've had to suspend all our operations because humanitarian workers are themselves in need of humanitarian aid. She said her family has evacuated 4 times, Sandeep, hoping to look for safety, and every time they move to a new place, the buildings around get bombed. It's as if they are strapped to a ticking time bomb.
And no country in the neighborhood wants them.
Nobody.
Egypt and Jordan, 2 countries.
They've made it abundantly clear that we are ready to send in humanitarian aid. That was discussed between Netanyahu, the Egyptian leader, and Biden, in fact, during Biden's visit. Now they are claiming that a humanitarian corridor for delivery of aid will be allowed, but fact of the matter is Egypt is on record as saying we do not want any refugees. Where do these Gazans go? So that's the question that's being asked. Netanyahu and their defense minister keep saying we warned them. We asked them to leave northern Gaza because we're going after Hamas. The question many are asking is, where do we go?
Where do they go?
There is no safe space in Gaza anywhere.
What's the tragedy of the Palestinians? So nowhere people,
Correct. So I was speaking to an ambassador just this morning today, and he told me, he said, initially the Arab world was willing to help Palestinians. They were there. Remember, Egypt was the leader of Palestinian, the whole, the Middle East then, and they were willing to take up, and the Palestinian cause was very much right up there. And then the Egyptian things heft started coming down. Saudi Arabia went up. They started helping them, and then they realized that even the Palestinians did not know what they really wanted. So they said that because of that, the money kept coming in. They said we will help you with the cause, but they didn't know which way to head. So that's where the Palestinians themselves were not able to figure out, even though initially, I'm talking about the history right now. Where do they go right now? I know for a fact that the Scotland PM has offered, saying that, okay, if the people want to get out of Gaza, they are more than welcome. They can come in and stay here. So literally, he's the first one to say, come and go, come and stay with us. The other side, the people who are living abroad, who have been protesting against the Israel attack, they are being asked to leave. In France, Macron has asked them to, a couple of them have been forced to leave France, and they've been sent back. I think the whole world is currently in flux, and the ambassador said that the world is in
flux, and we're looking at Cold War 2.0.
The ambassador said one thing. He said the door is sliding shut very fast, and he said, I'm only hoping that miracles happen, and somebody proves to me that miracles do happen. Otherwise, the door is sliding shut.
We'll be looking out for those miracles, Geeta. Thank you very much for joining me on the show. Neha, thanks very much. And for more coverage on Israel's war, continue watching News9 Plus. Thank you.